Welcome to this online course content that supports preparing to take the Maryland Tree Expert exam. The supplemental presentation to the study guide is intended to aid those individuals who are preparing to take the Maryland Tree Expert exam as required by the Maryland Tree Expert licensing law. Anyone seeking to practice or advertise tree care services in the state of Maryland must obtain this license from the Maryland Department of Natural Resources. This presentation corresponds to the information in the online study guide. The text of the study guide, version 5.1, may be found at dnr.maryland.gov/forest. Click on the Urban and Community Forestry tab at the top of the page, and then Tree Expert Law in the menu on the left-hand side of the website. Maryland Licensed Tree Expert Exam, Study Guide version 5.1, Chapter 1, Tree Laws and Standards. There are 4 Maryland tree laws that the licensed tree expert may encounter. These include Tree Expert Law and Regulations, Roadside Tree Law and Regulations, Reforestation Law, and Forest Conservation Act and Regulations. The Maryland Tree Expert Law was adopted in 1945, with regulations passed in 2003. This provides for a statewide law addressing tree care work done for compensation on private or public property in Maryland. The purpose is to provide a layer of consumer protection by licensing qualified and insured tree care companies and individuals. All tree care professionals practicing in Maryland must obtain this tree expert license. This license must be renewed every 2 years. Every licensee must carry and show proof of liability and property damage insurance. The LTE must maintain insurance protection for the period the license is in effect and also be in compliance with the requirements of workers' compensation. It is the responsibility of the licensee to keep insurance coverage current and provide DNR with current information at all times while the licensee is active. This may involve you contacting your insurance carrier to make sure that the certificate is sent to the department in a timely manner. Prior to issuing a tree expert license, a copy of your current insurance certificate must be submitted to the department. If you do not intend to acquire insurance until after you pass the exam, please note that your license will not be issued until we receive the certificate. The Department of Natural Resources must be listed as a certificate holder on the insurance policy. For workers' compensation, in order to comply with the State of Maryland Workers' Compensation Act, you must certify that you are either a sole proprietor and do not have any employees for which workers' compensation is required, or you provide a certificate of insurance for workers' compensation or an insurance binder number. The Tree Expert Law states that a person may not engage in the work or business of a tree expert without a tree expert license. It further states that a person may not solicit, advertise, or represent themselves to the public as a tree expert, or assume to practice as a tree expert, or use the title or abbreviation LTE or any other word, letter, or abbreviation tending to indicate that they are licensed or are a tree expert without having received the license, or when the license has been revoked or suspended. A criminal conviction for a first offense under the Tree Expert Law is a misdemeanor and is subject to a fine up to $500. There are some relatively recent changes to the Tree Expert Law. Those include reducing the apprenticeship period from 5 years to 3 years to be able to apply to sit for the exam and a license, and it added a continuing education requirement starting September 1, 2017. A licensee is required to obtain 8 continuing education credits every 2 years. Cannot renew without completing this requirement. Even-numbered licenses renew in even-numbered years. Odd-numbered licenses renew in odd-numbered years. Another change to the law and regulations includes having to have your licensed tree expert number on all trucks, documents, ads, etc. associated with conducting your business. A tree expert is someone who represents to the public that they are skilled in the science of tree care or removal, and who, whether in the business of the person or as an employee of another person, and whether under the title of arborist, tree specialist, tree surgeon, tree expert, or otherwise, engages in the business or work of treatment, care, or removal of trees for compensation. Treatment and care of trees includes removals, pruning, chemical application, supervising the treatment of trees, consulting, making diagnosis, trimming, pruning, cabling, crown reduction, mulching, removal, etc. A tree expert does not include a person engaged in logging or timber harvesting, or in the installation of underground facilities or associated site construction, or one who treats or cares for or removes a tree that is 20 feet or less, such as those in the landscape industry. To qualify for a tree expert license, you must pay the fee provided for in the statute, have obtained 18 years of age, have 2 years of approved college education in forestry, arboriculture, horticulture, applied agricultural sciences, or the equivalent education, with a minimum of 1 year of experience with a licensed tree expert in Maryland or an acceptable tree expert company in another state. Or you must have 3 years immediately preceding the date of your application that you have been engaged continuously in practice as a tree expert with a licensed tree expert in Maryland or an acceptable tree company from another state. And you must also have passed the exam given by the department. The department may take enforcement action under the tree expert law against 2 different types of violators: those that are licensed tree experts and those that are doing tree care without a license, or unlicensed tree care workers. If you are a licensed tree expert, the department may permanently revoke or temporarily suspend the license of any tree expert who is found guilty of fraud or deceit in obtaining the license in the first place, or negligence or wrongful conduct in the practice of tree culture or care. It is a criminal offense to practice as a tree expert if you are under suspension or revocation of your license. A licensee under the tree expert law is responsible for the quality and content of all work performed under his or her license. An employee under your license may not be required to have his or her own license. If a tree owner employs an unlicensed person to conduct tree work in Maryland, the owner is not guilty under the tree expert law. The responsibility to be licensed lies with the person doing the tree care work. The tree expert law is not the only document guiding the tree expert program. There are tree expert regulations. Regulations help clarify laws. The tree expert regulations first became effective in September 2002 and have been amended from time to time. They do incorporate the American National Standards Institute, or ANSI, tree care industry standards, including the A300 series and the Z133 safety document. There are also included in these regulations other requirements and responsibilities of the licensee, and the text of the regulations appears in your study guide, pages 2 through 5. Be certain to check that you're reading the most current version of the regulations. Regulations may be found on the Maryland Forest Service Tree Expert website or in Maryland COMAR, which stands for Code of Maryland Regulations. The Maryland Roadside Tree Law may be another law that you encounter as a tree expert in Maryland. It was passed in 1914 as one of the oldest conservation laws in the country. It protects roadside trees, ensuring their proper care and their compatibility with a dependable public utility system. It places all trees in public road rights-of-way in the state of Maryland under the jurisdiction of the Maryland Forest Service. This includes all public rights-of-way, whether they are state, county, or municipal. The intent of the roadside tree law is to protect, conserve, and enhance Maryland's roadside trees through proper tree care and ensure compatibility of trees with dependable public utility systems, while also providing for picturesque, scenic, and safe travelways throughout the state. Definition of a roadside tree. Before a roadside tree is trimmed or cared for in any way, including the application of pesticides, pruning, mulching, removal, a tree care permit must be obtained from the Maryland Forest Service. This would be for tree care on any roadside tree, which is a plant that has a woody stem or trunk that grows all or in part within a public road right-of-way. Trees growing off right-of-way but encroaching onto the right-of-way, such as by roots, branches, etc., are not roadside trees. This graphic shows the difference between a roadside tree and one that is not a roadside tree. The green circles represent the crown and branches of the tree. The inside circle represents the trunk. As you can see from this top graphic, both the crown and the trunk are outside of the road right-of-way line. Therefore, it is not a roadside tree. This next graphic shows the foliage and the trunk within the right-of-way line, and therefore it is a roadside tree. The trunk is entirely within the road right-of-way. This graphic on the bottom shows the crown of the tree overlapping into the right-of-way, yet the trunk itself is not within the right-of-way line. Therefore, it is not a roadside tree. This graphic, however, shows a portion of the trunk just over the road right-of-way line, and therefore, even though all of the trunk is not within the road right-of-way, it is a roadside tree. Here is an example of some maple trees that were planted by the adjacent property owner on his private property. Over time, as the trees grew, the tree that is farthest in the photograph next to the road sign grew large enough to grow into the road right-of-way. A licensed tree company removed that tree without a permit. A permit is also needed to plant a tree within a public road right-of-way. When tree care is performed on a roadside tree without a permit, a fine may be assessed or more severe action taken by the Department of Natural Resources. Why are roadside tree permits necessary? For many reasons. Permits are a good tool to help to protect our roadside trees, and issuance of tree care permits is important to ensure that only beneficial and necessary tree trimming, root cutting, fertilization, or other tree maintenance practices will be done and done correctly to roadside trees. In addition, tree hazards are documented, and corrective actions, including removals and replacements, is done in a timely and safe manner by trained professionals, such as yourself as a licensed tree expert or a certified roadside tree care expert. Roadside tree permits also help to ensure that the right tree, correct species, is planted in the right location, thereby avoiding future problems and conflicts with sidewalks, overhead and underground utilities, and site distances. The example of this Norway maple that was planted in a tree lawn that was too narrow, it's damaged the curbing and the sidewalk, and it was planted underneath utility lines. The permit procedure requires that the property owner who has a roadside tree within a public road right-of-way in front of his or her property actually signs the application. If the roadside tree straddles two properties, as we discussed in earlier slides, both owners must sign the application. The permit itself does not convey ownership or grant permission to do the tree work. Permission must be sought and granted by the tree owner. Maryland has adopted the so-called Massachusetts rule that limits a landowner's remedy against encroaching vegetation to self-help in nearly all circumstances. A landowner must assume responsibility for the care and preservation of his or her own property. This self-help rule means that a neighbor can cut back encroaching limbs or roots of an adjoining neighbor's tree to the property line. With these caveats, they may not destroy the tree by the pruning, they may not cut down the tree itself, and must stop at the boundary line unless they have the neighbor's permission. The person who owns the trunk owns the tree. Any person who trespasses and removes trees, unless they work for a public service company or public roads agency, is liable for any survey or appraisal costs that may be needed, any court costs that may be incurred, and triple the amount of the value of the trees or the timber cut. Who is a trespasser? Someone who intentionally and without consent or privilege enters another's property. This is the case whether or not the person was aware they were trespassing. In this case, it's pretty obvious. There's a no trespassing sign. As a tree expert, prior to doing any tree care work, it is good to inquire as to the exact location of the property line. Tree care under the roadside tree law is defined as the removal of a roadside tree, planting or maintenance or both of a roadside tree, application of pesticide to a roadside tree, or any treatment that may affect the health or growth of a roadside tree. When trees are removed from the right-of-way, replacement of those trees may be required by the Maryland Forest Service. If that is the case, it will say this on the permit. The Maryland roadside tree law states that any tree work being done in any public road right-of-way, as we already mentioned, in the state of Maryland, whether it's state, county, or municipal, must be performed according to state regulation and supervised by a licensed tree expert or a roadside tree care expert. To clarify the difference between roadside tree care expert versus licensed tree expert, a roadside tree care expert is one that works for a governmental agency and supervises that agency's tree care program and is certified by the DNR. A licensed tree expert works in the private sector and is licensed by DNR. A roadside tree care expert is an individual representing a government agency who is designated to supervise that government's roadside tree planting and maintenance operation, has passed the Maryland Forest Service examination for roadside tree care expert, and has been certified by the Maryland Forest Service as qualified to supervise that government's tree care program. As a licensed tree expert in the state of Maryland, you may contract work with a state, county, or municipal agency working on roadside trees under a roadside tree care expert. Become familiar with the roadside tree care regulations as well as the law. The regulations require that a certified roadside tree care expert or licensed tree expert supervise or conduct tree care on any roadside tree. It requires that proper tree care standards be met and requires a permit be obtained and in place prior to performing any tree care. As a licensed tree expert, you may be contracted to do work under a roadside tree permit, or you may apply for a roadside tree permit on behalf of a client. A person may cut down or prune a roadside tree without a permit only if the tree is uprooted or broken and in contact with an electric line, its branches are in immediate danger to person or property, or it stands within the right-of-way of a dedicated but unimproved road, or any roots being pruned or impacted are 1 inch or less. There are two types of permits that may be issued under the roadside tree law. The first is roadside tree blanket permits. They're typically issued on an annual basis or monthly basis and are issued at no charge to other public agencies for their annual tree maintenance. It may also be issued to public utility companies, and this is a charge of $250 per crew per month or $250 per year. This is for vegetation maintenance only. A roadside tree project permit would be applied for. It costs $25 per permit for any roadside tree care not covered under a roadside tree blanket permit. This is a roadside tree blanket permit for a public agency. As you can see at the top of the page, it lists the applicant information, the permit number, that this is a public agency, and the scope of work is within Allegheny County. The proposed tree care is to eliminate hazards to property, public safety, and health, and it does so by implementing these types of tree care. There are limitations on this permit, most notably that there is a second document made part of this permit with terms and conditions that the licensed tree expert must follow. And at the bottom, it is the Maryland staff person that issued the permit and contact information. In the bottom right-hand corner is the date it was issued and whether this permit is an annual permit or a monthly permit. This is a roadside tree blanket permit for a public utility. Notice it says the applicant is not a public agency. It identifies the specific crew leader. One permit is issued per one truck and crew. This particular crew under this permit can operate in these following counties. And again, the purpose of the tree care is to eliminate hazards. In this case, pruning that's going to occur to eliminate interruptions of electric utilities. To do that, they can do these particular aspects of tree care. None of the roadside tree blanket permits to a utility company allows for tree removal. So if you're the licensed tree expert for a tree company that is implementing tree care on your crew, you have to know the specifics of your permit. We may also include specific information about what the permittee is allowed to do or not do. Please make sure you read that. And again, at the bottom, it will show the reviewers and permit issuer name and contact information, and who is the tree expert that will be supervising this work. Again, these permits can be issued monthly, so be sure to check the bottom of the page to see how long the permit is valid. If, as a tree expert, you are conducting or supervising tree care work under a blanket permit, there may be a separate document made part of that permit that are the terms and conditions upon which you are beholden while implementing work under the permit. If tree care cannot be accomplished under a roadside tree blanket permit for a municipal or county or state agency or a public utility, then a roadside tree individual or project permit is applied for. In this case, again, you see that there's the contact information of the applicant at the top of the page. What is the scope of the permit? It is to remove 5 trees. Who is the applicant? The person whose property is adjacent to the trees. And what are the particulars of the permit? And in this case, it states the trees that are removed and some specific information about those trees. If there's any limitation on the permit, it'll be stated here. In this case, 5 trees have to be planted back. There's specific information about rights and responsibilities. Then the reviewer and permit authorized name and contact information, and who will be the LTE performing and supervising the work. Also, again, at the bottom of the page, it states how long the permit is valid for. The permit approval process. If, as a tree expert, you apply for a roadside tree permit on behalf of a client, you would submit that to the Maryland Forest Service office in your area, accompanied by a $25 check. Our staff reviews the site, and if approved, the permit is processed and mailed or emailed to the applicant. The permits are valid for 1 year and can be renewed upon request. Once issued, work may begin according to the terms and conditions of the permit, so be sure to read the permit carefully and do not begin work prior to receiving an approved permit. A permit is not a work order. The permittee is not obligated to perform the work. However, if they do, it must be performed according to those terms and conditions in the permit. If a roadside tree permit application is denied, there is an appeal process. If a permit is denied, the $25 fee is returned to the applicant with a letter explaining the decision. The applicant has the right of appeal, and appeals must be made in writing no later than 10 days after the date on which the denial, suspension, or revocation notice is served. The third law covered in this presentation is the Reforestation Law of 1988. It is commonly referred to as 5103, which is the Natural Resources Article citation. It states that when highway construction using state funds causes the cutting or clearing of 1 acre or more of forest land, then these trees need to be replaced. Replacement is on a 1-for-1 basis, meaning if 1 acre of forest is removed, 1 acre needs to be planted. If less than 1 acre is removed, then the roadside tree law, previously discussed, applies. The last law we'll cover in this presentation is the Forest Conservation Act of 1991. The Act states that any activity requiring an application for a subdivision, a grading permit, or sediment erosion control permit on a land area 40,000 square feet or greater is subject to the Act. This law is administered by local governments with planning and zoning authority and by the Maryland Forest Service for any project by a state or federal agency. One of the provisions of the Act is to protect specimen trees that are 30 inches or greater or 75% of the diameter of a current state champion. As a tree expert, you may be contracted to provide tree care for one of these specimen trees. We hope you found this supplemental presentation to be helpful as you prepare for the Tree Expert exam. This concludes Chapter 1. Please proceed to Chapter 2, Biology and Physiology.